tonight his grandson, who bears the same name, Rabbi Kotler, the CEO of the Lakewood Yeshiva, someone who has invested countless hours and days and weeks and months and years in order to continue making the place ever more thriving. Rabbi Kotler, I'd like to invite you to the dais to address us.
Good evening, and thank you for having me. I am an isolated American, or at least that's how I feel, who lives on the other side of this great big lake called the Atlantic Ocean. I've been fortunate to spend a few days with you here, and I must say, I am stunned by the scope of what I have seen of Jewish leaders from, I don't know why it's called Conference of European Rabbis, Rabbi Goldschmidt, I think you had the rabbi from Hong Kong here, and Russia, is that Europe, is that Eurasia? But such a scope of Jewish leaders from around the world. I was amazed to meet so many of you, and even more amazed at the dedication and sacrifice, the Mesiras Nefesh, that you all have to rebuild and strengthen the Jewish people. So thank you for having me here. Who would have imagined, and certainly who in the United States would have imagined, that I would meet a rabbi, I think there's someone here from Moldova, and I don't know if I pronounce it right, Croatia, and Italy, and Spain, and France, and of course, still in Europe, although it was said today that it might no longer be in Europe, it will always be in Europe, it just might not be in the EU, from Great Britain and so many other countries from around the world. To meet the rabbi from Istanbul on the train coming here, and then to meet another rabbi from Istanbul while I'm here, to meet people from Amsterdam, Balabatum from across the continent. What an amazing and inspirational experience that is for us. Who would have imagined this? To meet the Rabbanim from Munich, from Moscow, and on. As Chief Rabbi Mervis said today, this is a genuine celebration of the Jewish people. Judaism is thriving, Yiddishkeit is thriving in Europe. And while you face challenges, hey, we always did. Historically speaking, we're not in such a bad place. I know that's a terrible measure, but hey, we have a historical consciousness. We have historical memory. From a historical point of view, Yiddishkeit is thriving and flourishing. Do you have challenges? Of course you have challenges. Do you have terrorism and you have nutcases and you have haters? Hey, we have that in Poway, California. We have that in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. You have that all over the world. You have your share of challenges. But this, to me, is a celebration, and that's the message that I'm going to carry back from this. I think in the United States, we can learn from you how to build a people with resilience in the face of adversity, how you can overcome. We have maybe 10% of the challenges you have. In a moment, I'll come to our challenges, but we have far fewer challenges in so many different ways. We have one federal government. We have different model of freedom of religion. We have an amendment in the Constitution that guarantees freedom of religion. We don't have challenges of shechita yet. We don't have challenges of bris milah. We have so many wonderful things. And to see you here building the Jewish people in the face of adversity, I come here not to offer wisdom, but I come here to take back inspiration from you to us in the United States. I like to think of the United States as having 3 A's. My name only starts with 2, but I like to think of the U.S. as having 3 A's. We have abundance, Any problem, we just throw money at it. We have arrogance, tremendous arrogance. I myself, I've walked the streets of Europe, and I know sometimes people yell at you. I've never had it in Moscow, by the way. Rabbi Goldschmidt, no one has ever called me a dirty Jew in Moscow. I've never had it in Berlin. I've had it in other European capitals, unfortunately. But I walk differently. I'm an American. We have abundance and we have arrogance. But from a Jewish point of view, we also have an incredibly painful apathy which inflicts our people. And while we have kosher sushi in just about every gas station, and we don't have armed guards at our shuls, not yet, but we have such wonderful abundance, and yet we have so much apathy. And to see the Mesiras Nefesh here, to me, is so inspirational. I'm going to carry that back to my colleagues and to all those that I know in the United States with a message. The image of Europe is wrong. The image of Europe is distorted. Yes, you have problems, but the image of Europe is incorrect. The reality is you have builders of Judaism and communities that are thriving and growing everywhere around. Allow me one short Torah thought. Shlomo HaMelech, the great King Solomon, said, Shma b'ni musar avicha v'al titosh toras imecha. Hear, my son, King Solomon said, hear the ethical discourse of your father and listen to the Torah wisdom of your mother. And for those of us who are more involved in Jewish education, it seems that Shlomo HaMelech got things mixed up. Because in the ordinary way of life, it was my mother who yelled at me not to smoke. It was my mother who yelled at me not to stay out late at night. It was my mother who said to me, don't speed. It was my mother who warned me from all the terrible things that, of course, I never listened to her about. And it was my father who taught me Torah. And yet, King Solomon says, Shma b'ni musar avicha, listen to the musar of your father, v'al titosh, do not lose, do not detach yourself, mitoras imecha, from the Torah of your mother. Let me share with you, musar avicha v'toras imecha, the Torah of my mother and the musar of my grandfather. My mother grew up in Memel, today known as Klaipeda. As she described it, she had an idyllic childhood. She never experienced anti-Semitism. Things were wonderful. She grew up in the 1930s. In 1938, everybody talked about the Sudetenland and other places. Hitler marched into Memel to a cheering, raucous crowd. I've watched the video many times. My mother showed it to me many times. To a crowd of cheering Memel citizens, and took over without a shot fired, without a moment of resistance. My mother's classmates left the school that day. They went to the shul, to the synagogue in Memel, and they proceeded to tear the Sifrei Torah to shreds. My mother said to me, Toras imecha, she said to me, never forget, never ever forget, don't think in the United States things are different. People are people. And what happened to me in Memel can happen to you in the United States and can happen anywhere in the world. What a Torah to tell a 6-year-old. But hey, it was only a few years after the Holocaust, and that was the Torah my mother instilled in me. I still always think about 2 passports, those types of things, because of that Torah that she instilled in me. So although in the United States we have such abundance and such arrogance, the reality is we should not be so sanguine. We should not be so comfortable in our skin. Yes, we don't have guards on the shuls yet, but we should recognize that the world can and always has been a very dangerous place. I laud the CER for its effort to fight anti-Semitism. We have here a representative commissioner from the German government who is helping with that. I mentioned to the commissioner we had the privilege of meeting Dr. Felix Klein from the German government, who is tasked with battling anti-Semitism in Germany. We heard from the European Commission twice today, and we see the commitment of civil society in partnership with such a great organization like the CER to battle anti-Semitism and to battle any form of racism and to ensure that Jews always have a home and a comfortable place in Europe. Allow me to close with Musar Avicha, with the ethics of my grandfather and father. My grandfather escaped from a little village in Belarus called Kletsk. My father escaped from Kletsk. My father went to Odessa. He spent 6 weeks in Odessa. He managed to get a certificate for Palestine. He spent some time in Istanbul, and he made his way to Palestine. My grandparents were murdered from my mother's side. My mother made her way across Russia, spent some time in Moscow, took the Trans-Siberian Express. It was not an express in those days, ladies and gentlemen. Landed up in Kobe, Japan, got stuck in Shanghai for the duration of the war, and came back after the war with terrible tuberculosis. Her entire life she had ill health. My grandfather made his way across Russia to Kobe, Japan, my father's father, and he came to the United States Erev Pesach, 1941, on a special visa from the U.S. State Department. So he went from Kobe to San Francisco. Chol Hamoed Pesach, he traveled to Grand Central Station. At Grand Central Station, that's the big train station in New York City, the entire Jewish community of New York came out to greet him. The moment he stepped out of the train, this was 1941, I'm not talking about 1944 or 43 or 42. In 1941, he started to scream in Yiddish, Medav Rativ in Yidden. We have to save the Jewish people. We must save them. A catastrophe is coming to Europe. And he said, we have to rebuild Torah. We have to build the institutions with Jewish learning, wisdom, and scholarship that we had for thousands of years, and we must do so in the United States and anywhere around the world where we can do so. And he proceeded to build in the United States, where back then there was even more apathy. And this is the secret, has been the secret of our success. One word, Torah. Torah institutions, Torah study, Limud HaTorah. All the other things of Jewish communities are great, and we have them in abundance. But the one thing that saved us as a people in the United States, and the one thing on which we have built our current success, and on which we base our future, and that is Torah, Torah institutions, and Torah study. What you are doing, Rabbanim, not as community leaders, but to bring Limud HaTorah, the study of Torah, into your communities, is the same secret of success. In my eyes, Moscow and Milan are no different than Miami, although the weather might not agree with that. In my eyes, if we can have kollels, if you can have Jewish institutions of learning for adults, not just for children, in places like Denver, in places like Los Angeles and Toronto and New York City and Chicago, and across in just every single major city in the United States, we have a kollel. Any city worth its salt has a kollel, and I will explain that in a moment. There's no reason why every single Jewish city in Europe cannot have the same. It's just a matter of will, and then it's a matter of money, and the money follows the will. Why? Why a kollel? Because the Jewish people are the people of the book. If you want to maintain your identity, it's not enough to have children studying. The adults have to engage and love their tradition, their knowledge, and to study too. We are a nation of scholars, a spiritual nation of scholars. Let us never forget that, and let us put that foremost. And as we have been involved in a very, very, very modest way in Moscow, and in a modest way in Berlin, hopefully, with Mr. Vanderkamp's help, we'll be involved shortly in Amsterdam. We look at Europe, we've been involved with the Dayan. Dayan Ehrentreu, I must say to you, the Shabbat that I spent in Edgware blew me away to see such a thriving, energetic Jewish community. Amazed. And I see your vision for Borehamwood. I feel guilty dying every day that we haven't done enough for you. But to see your vision for Bournemouth, one of the largest Jewish communities in Europe, there's no reason why there should not be a kollel, a house of Jewish study for an entire community in every Jewish city across Europe. So you will say to me, there goes the arrogant American speaking. The answer is yes. However, my grandfather started Lakewood with 13 Talmidim, and they were all considered to be crazy. Thank you, and my best wishes, and Hatzlacha.